Hi, everybody. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mick. Oh, this is me. So I come from a dev background. I did a lot of development, started hobbying on it pretty young with basic, QBasic, DOS batch stuff. Got home internet sometime in the 90s and started doing web stuff, and that just progressed. It turned into a 10-year plus web app developer career, which I then pivoted into security in 2016. So I've been doing application security since then with Secure Ideas. So stepping into kind of what today is about. So what is SamuraiWTF? I think most of the people that would choose to attend this webinar probably have some notion of what it is. We're going to talk about it a bit more. We've got what tools and labs does it have in it today. And we'll go on a little tour around the app. We've got how is it put together? How can you extend it? If you want to modify it, if you want to stick something in your own kind of build of it, how you would go about doing that, where you should be looking, at least as a starting point. We're not going to go super deep in the time we have. But then, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved if you want to. We were always looking for contributors, so we'll do that. So stepping on forward. Section header. And this being fourth quarter, everyone's ramping up, everyone's super busy. So we're not going to rush, but I'm also not going to try to stretch this to fill a full hour if we naturally come to an end earlier than that. So what was SamuraiWTF? So let's start with where it came from. It used to be on SourceForge, and it looked like this. And so you can see here, 2008, it was a Linux ISO, 733 meg Linux ISO. 5 years later, it had switched from being an ISO to being distributed mainly as a VMware VM. And at that point, it was pushing kind of just below 3 gigs. 2016, it was still a similar format, but it had grown at that point by a full gig. It was nearly 4 gigs at that point. And it bundled up a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of other open source projects, tools, stuff like SQL map, or SQL map if you prefer. Burp, Zap. Burp is not open source. I'll remember to acknowledge that here. Burp is obviously closed source, but it's had a community edition of Burp bundled into it before as well. And lots of targets you can use for doing labs around application security concepts. And those varied. Some of them are your like DVWA type stuff, where it is is like a collection of vulnerabilities, but it's targeted. It is, I want to show this particular vulnerability if I'm teaching a class, or I want you to try SQL injection. I want you to try, cross-site request forgery. That sort of breakdown. And those are useful. Those are very useful teaching tools for a particular example. Other times they were things like Dojo Basic or the Dojo Scavenger Hunt, where it was structured like an actual app, and it was a go find the vulnerabilities type of feel. And so we had Kevin Johnson, Jason Gillam, Justin Searle were some of the main contributors. You get a few others in the screenshot there as well. James Jardine. So that was sort of the group of people maintaining the ISOs and the VMs at that point in time. Then in late 2016, security has hired somebody that's me, And so I came into it, and I taught classes a couple of times, mostly to developers. And for some reason, I got myself into a state where my 3.8 gigabyte VM was just a little bit too big for the 4 gig thumb drives we had. I believe we might have even had 8 gig thumb drives, but the FAT32 file max size limit became an issue. And I had a class go not as well as I'd hoped. I think I managed to save it, but I came back from teaching a class, and I was pissed off about how it went, which, in true developer fashion, caused me to find this work that actually Jason had already started on migrating it to a Vagrant build, and I'll elaborate a bit more on what that is. And so I grabbed this and I pulled it down out of GitHub, because at that point, the main the VMs were actually passed back and forth through SourceForge, but this initiative to put it in Vagrant was actually started on GitHub. So I cloned down this Vagrant build that had been started, and I started throwing stuff out that I didn't like. I threw away anything I didn't like, and I built it back up over the course of a couple of evenings, basically. So what is Vagrant? I'm assuming some people know what Vagrant is. I'm assuming some people maybe don't. So high level, Vagrant is it's a configuration tool where you have a text-based file. Actually, it's technically a Ruby file. And then you've got a command line tool that consumes it to configure a virtual machine. And it's got a concept of provisioners. Now, at that point in time, I did them all in Bash. So the provisioners would just SSH into the VM after it created it. And it would run a bunch of Bash scripts and install all the things. And there's the concept of a base box as well there. And at that point, I was using a vanilla Debian Linux base box to build off of, and like OpenBox window manager. And I slimmed the thing down quite a bit. Another thing that came along kind of at the same time was the primary target switch from being VMware to being VirtualBox. Now, there's obviously some back and forth there. You can almost consume a VirtualBox VM with VMware, and vice versa. It tends to take a little bit of adjustment, but it almost works. So that still kind of worked. But my experience was the opposite of everybody else's. Everyone else was comfortable with VMware and had bad experiences with VirtualBox. And I had been using VirtualBox for probably 2 years at that point in time. So I came into it reasonably recently compared to other people. And I guess most of the issues have been worked out. So I didn't have a lot of problems with VirtualBox, but VMware, for some reason, I just had bad luck with it. It didn't play nice for me, and often I'd go to use a VM and find that it had somehow become unusable. So, but it didn't stop there. No. The project kept evolving, and there were a lot of other people involved at this point in time. So Jason got in there and did a bunch of stuff. We had some of our younger folks that came on, Corey and Oshan and Alex, that also joined Secure Ideas shortly after I did. They started integrating some of the technologies that they had dealt with a bit more. So Corey, for example, did a ton of container stuff, really interested in containers, and kept pursuing that interest in containers, and pushed towards containerizing a bunch of the targets rather than running them directly in the VM. And this made it so that we could target different runtimes more easily. We didn't have to worry about managing different versions of PHP because all of the apps were sharing it. So that freed up a little more flexibility there. Alex did a bunch of stuff with Packer. So Packer can be used for constructing those Vagrant base boxes, and automating and scripting that. And he's actually done a bunch of Packer automation stuff around Kali Linux, which he's talked about quite a bit as well. But the Samurai base box got kind of migrated to Packer. Jason did a bunch of automation stuff with Ansible. And part of the reason he did that, and part of the reason it's interesting, is that it let him target multiple platforms. So yes, there is the Vagrant base box that you can run on your machine as a VM that's got a application security lab environment in it. But also, I don't know if anyone watching this webcast has been in any of our classes recently, but a bunch of them we've done out of AWS workspaces, where we've used Ansible playbooks to provision the AWS workspace like the Samurai VM, essentially, using a lot of the same scripts and playbooks to set up the tools and the local targets, local to the workspace in this case, to be able to conduct the class. And so basically it's an entire cloud hosted VDI solution for running application security labs at that point. Or alternatively, the local VM equivalent of that. But there's more. So jumping ahead to what it actually looks like today. So you've got, and I'm looking at that blue rectangle in the top left there, SamuraiWTF Vagrant. So we've got SamuraiWTF Vagrant there, and it is that's one repo, right? So that pulls down the repo. We're going to look at more what that contains, but the Vagrant file and the provisioning scripts for the VM, they're all in that repo. That repo's total size is about 12 megabytes if you do a shallow clone of it. It is small, but it is small because a lot of the other stuff gets dynamically assembled. So you can take that, and if you run the Vagrant up command, the command that tells Vagrant to consume this file and stand up the thing, first thing it's going to do, if you don't have it already, is pull down the base box from their kind of central repository. Base box is maintained in Packer, but actually Vagrant is basically just downloading it and provisioning a VM based on it. And then it goes and fetches this Katana package manager / service manager. This is something Jason wrote to make a lot of this other stuff easier. So that'll get pulled. Lives in its own GitHub repo. And that's going to get loaded into the Samurai VM and configured. Once the VM comes up, you have the use of Katana to actually pull all of these other things on demand. So when you want them. So if you want to install any of the tools that it has, I forget the specific term we use for it, plugins and modules. So any of the tools it has modules for, it can pull in. A lot of those are, they're out there in the community. They're the Burp Community Edition, so the free version of Burp, or they're open source tools being pulled from their respective GitHub repos, or things like that. There are also a bunch of targets available that there are separately modules in Katana for. So RSpace, Musashi, and Wayfarer I've highlighted there as separate ones, because these are also projects that live under the sort of Samurai umbrella. Any of these you could grab and set up and run on their own. You don't need to run them inside of Samurai. But those 3 happen to be built for Samurai. But then there are also installers for other open source targets. There's the OWASP Juice Shop can be pulled in there, which is if you want something a modern looking Angular app set up like an e-commerce site, Juice Shop works for that. It's got a scoreboard and a whole built-in kind of CTF style setup. You've got a lot of there are some of the older targets are around, DVWA, Matilde. I think we actually host the versions of Samurai Dojo that get pulled in there, but they're also out there. So just kind of going by the way I've color coded this, the blue things are those are all code repositories that live under the Samurai organization. The red things, those are build artifacts, and the green things belong to other parties, basically. So, but a simple command, a vagrant up, pulls all this stuff together and creates a virtualized lab environment that can do all of the. It's got the installers for all these tools and targets, and most of them work mostly fairly seamlessly. And you might have seen some qualifiers or heard some qualifiers in there. Not everything is in the state that we would like it to be, but we use this, and that's an important part of it. We use Samurai for a lot of our classes. If it didn't work well, it would waste a lot of our time. It would annoy us, and we would address it. So it's a tool. It's out there. It's freely available for anybody to use. Free as in, I think actually both kinds of free, speech and beer. Anyway, let's take a step forward here. So keeping in mind this kind of structure, what tools and labs does it actually have? And I got some bullet points for that, but I think we've done enough bullet point slides. So what I'm going to do is actually hop into a Samurai instance here on my desktop. Oop. And switch to that. There we go. All right, so it looks like this.
May want to make it bigger.
Okay, we'll give it a try. Let's double size it. Oh, there we go. It's probably a little better.
Much better.
So that's, first of all, the page that I had open in the browser, the page that we landed on here. This is the web interface running locally in this VM, but this is the web interface for Katana. So this is the tool, this is the space that I go if I want to install. I got targets up here. I've got tools down here. Now it's not a huge list of tools. It's not like Kali, for example, where you have, probably 450 different tools in there. It's a small set of things that we use a lot in classes, as well as Nick too. And not a lot of things we don't need. So sometimes we manually install things for a particular class. Still, if we were using them repeatedly, we'd probably eventually write a module in Katana for them. But at this point, that's what we've put in there. We've got actually quite a few targets in here that can be pulled in. So I've got a few installed already, and I can open them from here. On the right hand side, I've got my uninstall, start, stop, install. There's an obvious one that I couldn't think of right there. Install. That's all there. The other thing is, and you can actually see I was doing stuff here. So Katana also exists as a command line app. In fact, that's what it is first, and then the web app kind of drives the same interface. So I can do all this same sort of installing, uninstalling, stopping, starting. I can also do from here, and I can do it as the Samurai user. So the user that a student would be in the VM without having to sudo to do it. So that's set up in here, and it's useful. I mostly drop down to the CLI if it seems like something's not working, something is not installing, and I want to know why. Then I'll install it through the CLI because that extra output makes it easy to troubleshoot. But by default, I tend to use the web interface for it. So Katana is baked into that kind of, it lives in a separate repo, but is part of the base level kind of build of Samurai. There are also old favorites like Dojo Basic in there, and I'm not going to walk around and show off all the vulnerabilities in Dojo Basic, but it's a classic kind of lamp stack PHP app with lots of flaws in it. There's also Musashi. So this one, it has been very much my project. And in fact, I would say that Musashi, I spend a fair bit more effort on Musashi than I do on the Samurai itself. At this point, other people work on Samurai. I do a bit more in the Musashi, but it's got, these are demonstrator apps. So for cross-origin resource, words are hard. For cross-origin resource sharing, of course, I've got this. It's an interface. It's not really a simulation of an app, but it has the ability to issue a bunch of different types of requests just by filling in stuff and hitting buttons. And I can use those to show cores, to teach that concept. And over here, I've got the ability to switch to different endpoints that have different cores policies on them. So if I scroll back up really quick here, this one, no cores policy at all on this one. This will be using just falling to the browser's same origin policy. It's going to cause an error. It says here to check your developer console, which you can do in the browser, but if I were teaching it, I often also show it in burp. So I tend to use burp in the classes. And you see here, you can see the cores error. You can go over to the network traffic and discuss what happened there. That wasn't open yet, so it didn't capture that request. But so I got cores. Also in Musashi, there's a CSP for content security policies. It's got these little, they're not really simulated flaws so much as they're injection points where you can throw JavaScript. The same way that you would in a cross-site scripting, but you don't have to go looking for it. You can just use it. But it has the ability to customize the content security policy. So you can demonstrate changing it, generating errors, generating violations, seeing how it works in there. So this is it. And there are actually some exercises built into both of those. Now, there is a JWT demonstrator for manipulating JSON web tokens as well, built into this project. I can't remember what the host is called, so I'm going to use it. JWT.test. Okay, and that is, I got that right? Okay. Is that really what it is? That doesn't sound right to me. Let's see what happens. Yeah, no, it does. Okay, so I could grab a JWT from somewhere, and I believe there is actually one hidden in the page source here, but sometimes I just grab one from Juice Shop. If I paste it in here, it goes and it breaks it up into its parts and puts it into those boxes. And theoretically, there's some tampering functionality in here. The JWT module is probably 75% complete. It doesn't do quite everything that I would like it to do at this point, but it's pretty close. So mostly apps for demonstrating things, not for not like a capture the flag style situation, but this is a concept and I want to show it. That's what Musashi contains. Also, this is one of our younger apps, and oh boy, this one mostly came together last summer. That's not the response. I don't remember the credentials. That's okay. I can figure it out. Let me try one more. I'll tell you about it, but I can't type and talk at the same time. It's just my limits. One of my limitations as a person. So, is that it? No. Okay. So, Wayfarer. So Wayfarer, it's a more complex sort of setup. It's got there's a React front end, and I'm wondering if I knocked it down in here at some point. It's a React front end, and it's got a Node and Express backend. And this is all sort of orchestrated with containers and stuff. So it's Docker Swarm. There's a container for the front end just for serving up the front end. There's another container for the API service. There's a MySQL container behind that. And there's actually, there's an OAuth provider built in as well. I don't know that it's merged into the main branch, which is probably why I'm not seeing it here. But so we had an intern with us through last summer, Ryan, who really, really bright. Like if he was on as a developer, and we were really lucky to have him. So he was tasked near the end of the summer. We wanted to get him to sort of stretch his legs a bit as a developer. And although it is not merged here, he actually wrote an OAuth provider for this, which is cool. And that might need some further refinement. That's not what's breaking right here, though. This is just me not remembering the credentials and there. I know where to look for them, but right now it's not really what I want to kind of focus today's kind of discussion on. But so it's an API driven with a static kind of front end app structure. It very closely matches the way apps are typically built today. We'll be coming back to this. So, pardon me. Jumping back over, I'm going to try to avoid hitting the end webinar button. Let's jump back to the slides for a sec here. So, shrink down that VM. Back over to the slides. So it's kind of a rundown of some of the more interesting things. It wasn't comprehensive. I didn't pull in the word lists and do stuff with those. I didn't even open Burp, although I had it installed there. But it's basically one-click install, starting, stopping. This status polling on RSpace is not correct, and a few of them have actually show as available before they really are. That's a known issue. The polling we're doing around containers stuff, to get the status is not quite as robust as we would like it to be at this point in time. So it's just use a little bit of patience. If you hit start and it says immediately that it is ready, but it is standing up, a lamp stack in containers, try again in 20 seconds, hit refresh, and it'll probably be fine. Okay, so we're going to do, these are kind of two of these are the main ones that I showed there. So the Musashi's got a bunch of demo tools. The Wayfarer is the new app that's got some cool stuff. RSpace, Corey uses that in his container security class to do, it's a Kubernetes cluster. And so what he does with that is he'll start with let's assume you found a command injection flaw in a containerized interface of some kind. I think he actually does, he exploits default credentials on a Jenkins or something like that as a starting point. But he takes that and he escalates his privileges in the cluster until that basically takes over the cluster. So RSpace is the target used for that. And I can't remember if that is currently running on Minikube or on Kind, Kubernetes and Docker. I think it's Kind, but I'm not certain. But so RSpace, containerized microservices, neat concept. I don't know how much Corey manually reconfigures it at this point to make his classes work. So I don't know that it works great out of the box today. But it is there, and it is interesting. Pardon me. So, what you probably can't tell from the coughing there is that I am situated in lovely South Carolina, where the air itself is actually a gigantic vessel for carrying allergens to you. So that's triggering a little bit of coughing there, so I apologize for that. Okay, so how is it put together and how can it be extended? So let's take a look at the actual structure of I'm saying all of it. So I'm mostly going to focus on Samurai itself and Katana here, and how they work together. So let's take a look at GitHub. So there's a bunch of stuff here. But my thought was, let's just hop into the browser and go take a look at it there, and we'll see which files are sort of interesting and which ones are the starting points you can follow if you're looking for. There we go. Which ones are the starting points you can follow if you're looking to figure out how something works. I don't normally use the zoom in the browser, but it does exist. Yes, there we go. Okay. There we go. Scale up the size a fair bit there, but I think that'll be better for us. So, okay. So this is GitHub. This is actual GitHub today. SamuraiWTF is an organization in GitHub. And under that organization, you've got the SamuraiWTF repo, which is where we're going to start. So I'm clicking in there, fingers crossed, hoping that I have an internet connection in here still. There it is. Okay. So you can see the sort of directory structure of this project here. Just taking a sec there. Okay. Right in the root here, we've got kind of the key places that I would probably start if I were changing something in here. So there's the vagrant file. I mentioned this is it's actually Ruby syntax, but it's a descriptor for the virtual machine itself. Here it's talking about, it's got a provider, it's saying have a GUI as opposed to running in headless mode. You've got the memory allocation and various other configurations. And then the provisioner here. And this particularly pointing out because it's saying run this shell script in the VM, provision the VM by running this script, and then commented out stuff. Now, when it comes to modifying the Vagrant file, hopping over to vagrantup.com. So Vagrant itself is a HashiCorp product. I believe it is open source as well. The GitHub link there would suggest that I'm correct about that. But it also has its own documentation, and it is pretty good 95% of the time. It is. I've had a lot of luck following their documentation historically when trying to figure things out with it. So that's for working with this file, which would be things about how the virtual machine is provisioned on the machine, both in terms of its characteristics, its resource allocations, and what provisioning scripts to run on it. That can all be driven from here. It also this is where the base box is specified. So this right here, this points to the Samurai base box on the Vagrant. I forget what they call it, but the central repository essentially, which is that's the part that's maintained with Packer, and Alex just kind of takes care of that. So we don't have to. But you could actually point that at a vanilla Debian instance like I did. You could basically anything else you can find in the repo, you could attempt to use in that space. I don't guarantee it would work because our provisioning scripts are based on a certain understanding of what the machine will be set up like. So you could very likely be missing dependencies, but the possibility exists there. Now, looking at that provisioning script, that this was the one that the Vagrant file points to. It says provision it with that. So this does some of the other stuff. So installing dependencies that are not baked into the base box. That happens here. Bunch of configuration stuff for the desktop. I think a lot of this is just to set our wallpaper. Exporting an environment variable, stuff like that. Cleaning up afterward. You see some references to make cert here. So make cert, we didn't write, obviously. You can see where it's pointed here. But what it is good for is setting up a trusted certificate authority on the system, and then in an automated way and in a non-interactive way, being able to create certs off of that for the different apps. And so this is, Wayfair is the only app that uses it at this point, other than, I think I did it for Juice Shop as well. But Juice Shop is currently broken because the repo actually moved. So there's an open issue that I opened today for that. But that aside, so make cert's leverage for that, for getting that TLS in place on the local targets, which is necessary for certain exercises because browsers treat specifically it's the same site cookie flag. And it is, if you want to set it to none, which I've seen apps several weeks in a row that are doing this during my regular penetration testing activities. So I can tell you that it is happening. In order for those cookies to respect the flag of same site equals none, you have to have TLS in place. You have to have the secure flag. So it's necessary actually in order to perform some of the exercises these days. And so we have it. We have some support for TLS on the targets running locally. It's a bit of an aside, but it's there. Here's where it's fetching and installing Katana, so it fetches it from the repo during part of the setup, and then does some configuration on it. Now, the actual runtime for this, right? I mean, as a bash script, you would expect it to be pretty fast. Having the base box already on my machine, I can go from nothing to standing up a working Samurai instance in probably under 90 seconds, probably less than 90 seconds. So it really does work at this point, because it doesn't have a bunch of other dependencies to install, because you're doing it through Samurai or through Katana later. It actually comes up very fast, which makes it easy to iterate on when doing development type stuff. We're trying to modify it. All right. So let's jump over to, didn't even click the link that I meant to. I'm going to pop into, we'll just take a step back. Those are the main two files that I would be looking at for trying to figure out how to change stuff in here. A lot of the other stuff is used by the Packer build. And there are some artifacts there from previous versions of the build process that haven't necessarily been removed, because we didn't know yet if we were going to go back to that. So you'll find some Ansible playbooks in there that I don't think are used, at least as part of the Vagrant build at this point. They may be used for the base box. But switching over to Katana, so it's a Python app. You got the CLI, you've got the core stuff. There's web app stuff. There's some HTML in here. But if you're coming into Katana to modify it, it's probably to do one of two things. Either you're wanting to go into the modules and add a target or a tool. These are described with the YAML. So we jump into, let's look at the juice shop one. There you go. It's nice, fairly human readable. It's got an install task, and then it's got a set of steps for that. Right? Get the package. And this is where it's going wrong at this point, because this is now under an org called juice shop, not under Bjorn's old repo, under his user account. So down here, we've got a start it, create the service descriptor, because it's actually creating service descriptors. So you can systemd command it. It sets up the host's entries in the host files. So that's how we handle the resolution at this point. We're not actually running a local DNS service. We're doing host resolution by putting a bunch of entries in the host file. Yeah, there is a TLS setup here where it does a thing. Actually creates a script and executes it and then cleans up the script. There's a reason I did that. It may seem like extra steps, but it solved a problem for me at the time. And then writing the Nginx config, because we access, because we're doing name-based routing of the HTTP traffic, we're accessing everything through an Nginx reverse proxy. So all of that running locally. So the target is running locally. The Nginx reverse proxy is running in front of that locally. And then you're accessing it from your browser or your other tools, also locally. So we got the remove instructions there, start, stop, status, which is how it pulls the status. So all that kind of described in the module. And all of the modules follow the same basic concept, although the specific steps for installing, uninstalling, even polling for status can be very different. Wayfarer being a Docker swarm app, you'd be using different commands to pull the status for that than something that was just a single container. So, yeah. which brings us to the other thing that you might be doing in here. So plugins. So the actions that are supported by those YAML files are themselves defined in the plugins. So the ability to do a thing in there, get URL. Those are defined in the plugins. If I wanted to find another way to get the status from a Docker Swarm process, which I keep bringing up because that's something that hasn't been done and needs to be, that I would solve that problem by writing a plugin that correctly does that, and then modifying the related target modules to use that plugin. So, I mean, that's high. It's a bit high level. It's a bit of a gloss over, but it is kind of the quick and dirty rundown of how the code is structured in here, in both the Katana and the Samurai projects. I'm not digging into the targets right now. It is another deep rabbit hole that we don't have time for today. But it's not out of any kind of objection to people getting in there, messing around, making their own versions, changing stuff, any of that. Fixing problems, adding problems. Everybody does it. It's okay. Yeah. So I'll hop back in here and just kind of an overview. Key files, what matters, how things are structured. Okay, these were the backup plan in case I couldn't get to the GitHub repos. So we're skipping right to the end here. So how can you get, if you want to get involved, if you wanted to take Samurai and customize it, if you wanted to make improvements, add stuff, change things, or any of the other related projects, right? The Wayfarer, it'd be great to have people working on that. In fact, so I've got a section of what needs to be done. This is very much my list that I didn't run past anybody else, but my personal things that I am not finding the time to do right now, but would really like to work on. Pulling the status better, particularly around that one Docker Swarm one for Wayfarer. Bug fixes. There are bugs in places. There are bugs that we have no trouble living with when we use this to teach classes several times a year, but there are bugs. And making stuff better is good, right? So the Wayfarer could use a lot of extra dev work. It's a very bare bones kind of ticket system today. I know I didn't get into it and show it, but it's a very bare bones kind of ticket system. The credentials for the user accounts for that, by the way, they're in the database provisioning script. They're attached as comments because they're actually hashed in the database, but there are comments revealing in plain text what they are. And then, so Musashi, there are directories in it for OAuth components to actually demonstrate the OAuth flow. But the development work in that, I kind of abandoned. I hit a time limit on how far I could go before teaching the class that I was getting it ready for, which didn't actually require that I dig deep into OAuth. So they stopped in whatever state they were in. But I would like to have OAuth and flawed OAuth implementations kind of covered within Musashi as well. So those would be my top items. We've got contact stuff up there. The Slack channel. So the professionalevil.com has a link to join our public kind of community, Slack community. And there is a SamuraiWTF channel in there. So you start doing stuff with it, whether it's just jumping in and using it and playing around in it, and it doesn't work. Or you go to provision it with Vagrant, it doesn't work. Whether it's that, or if you're actually trying to change it, if you're customizing it for yourself, if you're wanting to take on your first kind of issue and you want to help contribute to it, whatever the case, in that Slack channel, that's the best way to kind of talk to me and the rest of the team. I've got my email, I've got my Twitter up there. I don't tweet basically ever. I kind of lurk, but I do respond there. So email, the dog food, right? So the significance of the inclusion of dog food there, obviously, well, people probably mostly surmised, it's about eating your own dog food, meaning we drive the things we prioritize fixing, the features we prioritize adding to these projects are driven from our experiences using them in a classroom environment, using them for teaching, using them for running labs. And I think if you're using it similarly, then you will immediately know what it is that bugs you, what it is you need to deal with. And that kind of point of view, I think is something to keep. There are lots of cool things that could be done in there, but jumping in and doing something just because it is cool is not going to get not necessarily going to get a ton of traction. But if you try it out and have a particular experience with it that you want to make better, that will definitely get traction. So that's kind of it. This is where we stop.